What if I told you that the ascetic monk, the guy starving himself in some freezing Himalayan cave.
Right, the ultimate symbol of detachment.
Exactly. What if I told you that guy and the ruthless Wall Street banker who's just destroying his health to buy his 5th mega yacht are actually doing the exact same thing?
I mean, on the surface, that sounds completely absurd. Society looks at those two figures and puts them at absolute opposite ends of the human spectrum.
Yeah, one is the poster child for worldly greed, and the other is like the pinnacle of holy purity.
But if you look at them structurally, the actual internal engine driving both of those men is identical.
And that is exactly what we're getting into today. We're taking a deep dive into the biggest lie that human beings tell themselves about happiness, progress, and, well, what it actually takes to be free.
It's a really profound illusion to dismantle, honestly, because it forces us to look at the actual machinery of our own desires rather than just pointing at the objects we happen to be chasing.
Right, and that machinery is incredibly good at hiding in plain sight.
Oh, it's brilliant at it.
So to get to that machinery, I want you, the listener, to think about a highly specific, universally experienced moment in your life. You know the exact moment I'm talking about.
I think we all do.
Yeah, it's that moment you finally hit that target you've been agonizing over for years. Like maybe you landed the big executive promotion.
Or you finally closed on that house you thought you'd never be able to afford.
Yes. Or you finally get into that relationship you were absolutely convinced would just, fix every broken part of your life.
Right, you reach the finish line.
You pop the champagne, you celebrate, you feel this sense of total, undeniable arrival. But then a few days pass.
Maybe a week or two, if you're really lucky.
Yeah, if you're lucky. And you're sitting on your beautiful new couch in your shiny new life, and suddenly, in the quiet of a Tuesday evening, you hear it.
That hum.
That faint, familiar background hum of restlessness. It's back. Yeah. And you just sit there thinking, wait, is there something structurally broken inside of me?
Am I just an incredibly ungrateful person?
Why isn't this enough?
It's a devastating moment of isolation when that realization hits. Because the culture around us is continuously broadcasting a very specific promise, right?
Constantly. Buy this, achieve that.
Exactly. It promises that if you just acquire the right combination of things, the right partner, the right income, the right morning meditation routine, that hum will permanently stop.
So when you get all this stuff and hum comes back anyway, the immediate agonizing assumption is personal failure. You assume you did it wrong.
Or that you're just inherently defective.
But what if, and this is the core of our deep dive today, what if that restlessness isn't a bug in your personal psychology?
What if it's not a chemical imbalance or a failure of gratitude at all?
Right. What if it's a structural feature of human existence? That is the territory we are exploring today. We are looking at a comprehensive, highly analytical, philosophical text outlining what is known as the AP framework.
Developed by Acharya Prashant.
Yes. And the mission of this deep dive is to unpack this really radical, highly structured philosophy. It diagnoses the human condition not as a problem of circumstance.
Not a problem of trauma either.
Right. Not trauma, but as a fundamental, inescapable structural error.
And we really need to set the stage carefully before we dive into the mechanics of this framework. Because, whenever people hear the phrase spiritual philosophy, they immediately tense up.
Oh, yeah. They brace for the dogma.
Exactly. They expect to be asked to believe in a specific deity or adopt a new religion or, start burning sage and waking up at 4 a.m. to chant.
Which is totally fine if that's your thing, but that's not what this is.
Not at all. The AP framework operates in a completely different paradigm. It doesn't ask you for blind faith. It doesn't want you to adopt a new belief system to replace your old one.
So what does it do?
It functions more like a diagnostic manual for human consciousness. It offers a set of really sharp tools for honest self-observation, and it starts with the most undeniable fact of your daily existence.
Which is?
You are here, and you experience suffering, conflict, and that persistent hum of restlessness.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if the cause of this unavoidable suffering isn't our stressful jobs or our complicated families or our bank accounts, what exactly is the root?
Well, if we strip away all the external circumstances, where is the error located?
Yeah, where is it?
To locate it, we have to completely dismantle and redefine a word that we all use casually every single day. The ego.
The ego. Okay.
In the AP framework, the ego is the central problem. It's the core illness. But we have to actively unlearn what pop psychology has taught us that word means.
Because usually when we say someone has a massive ego, we mean they're just arrogant, right? We picture the loudest guy in the boardroom taking credit for everyone else's work.
Or the narcissist bragging and or an athlete talking trash.
We equate ego with like really high self-esteem or toxic vanity. But the text makes a very sharp surgical distinction here, doesn't it?
It does, and it's a distinction that catches a lot of people off guard. In this framework, the ego is not merely boastfulness. Those are just specific flavors of it. The meekest, most self-effacing, quietest person in the room has an ego that is just as robust as the bragging billionaire.
Wait, really? The quiet person who's always apologizing?
Absolutely. The person who constantly apologizes for their own existence, who feels fundamentally unworthy of love, that person is operating entirely from ego.
Oh, wow.
Even the spiritual seeker who wears simple robes and proudly declares, "I have conquered my ego," that declaration itself is a massive ego move.
So how does the framework actually define it then?
It defines the ego simply and mathematically as the felt sense of I am X.
I am X.
Yes, where X is literally any object, quality, identity, belief, or attribute you attach to that I.
Okay, so if I say I am a podcaster, I am a parent, I'm a political progressive, I am a failure, or I am an introvert, all of those are the ego at work.
Every single one of them. The ego is an error in organizing experience. And what's really fascinating here is that the AP framework traces the origin of this error not to some mystical fall from grace.
Not a Garden of Eden situation.
Right, not a spiritual failing. It traces it to a harsh physiological reality. The ego doesn't start as a philosophical concept in the mind. It starts as a biological fact of the body.
Wait, a biological fact?
Specifically, it begins with the skin boundary.
The skin boundary. We're talking about literal human biology here. Let's ground that. How does my literal skin create my psychological suffering?
Think about it. The physical organism arrives in the world with absolute physical separateness. Your skin marks a literal, impenetrable boundary between inside and outside.
Okay, sure, I end where my skin ends.
Right. This physical separateness forms what the framework calls the physical ego. And this physical ego lends shape, geometry, and dimension to the universe you perceive.
Give me an example of that.
Well, our specific eyes, our ears, our human proprioceptive systems, they dictate how reality looks and feels to us. The three-dimensional structure of the world, the spectrum of visible light we can see, the frequencies of sound we hear.
Right, because a dog hears things I can't.
Exactly. These aren't independent, objective facts about the universe itself. They correspond exactly to the biological geometry of the human body doing the perceiving.
Oh, I see.
If you had the eyes of a mantis shrimp or the sonar of a bat, the entire geometry of the universe would instantly change for you.
So the physical ego builds the stage, physically speaking. It organizes the space based purely on the limitations of our biology. It draws a line and says, this side of the skin is me. The rest of the universe is not me.
Precisely. That is the physical ego. But then comes the complication.
The psychological ego.
Yes. If the physical ego gives the universe its physical shape and geometry, the psychological ego lends meaning and value to it.
Because objects don't have intrinsic meaning.
Right. Objects and events in the world don't come preloaded with significance. Like a scratched car door is objectively just a minor displacement of metal and paint molecules.
Just physics.
Just physics. The significance of that scratch, the sudden rush of anger, the feeling of being personally wronged, the panic about the repair bill, the desire to yell at whoever did it.
That's all me adding to it.
That is entirely the psychological ego's contribution. The ego projects value onto an essentially neutral universe.
And reading through the sources, I noticed the text makes a really radical, almost dizzying claim about this relationship between the ego and reality itself.
It does.
It basically argues that reality, as we can possibly know it, is a strictly dualistic concept. Like, you absolutely require a knower to have a known, a subject to have an object.
The framework pushes this to the absolute limits of reality. It's what philosophers would call an ontological claim. It states, point blank, no ego means no consciousness means no universe.
It's a huge claim, no universe.
If reality intrinsically requires an ego consciousness structure to be experienced, then you cannot step outside the ego to describe what objectively exists.
Because you have to be outside yourself.
Exactly. If the ego completely dissolves, there is no one left to report back on what the universe looks like. An unspoken of universe is a non-existing universe as far as any living ego is concerned.
So the perceiver and the perceived arise together.
And they fall together.
Man, that is heavy. It's saying we are actively participating in producing the universe we encounter just by being this bounded biological I.
We can't escape it.
But I want to pull us back down to the psychological ego, the IMX. Because while I was going through this material, trying to visualize how the ego actually operates day to day, I couldn't help but think of the ego as a hermit crab.
A hermit crab. That's an interesting visual. Walk me through the mechanics of that analogy.
Well, think about the biology of a hermit crab. It is born incredibly soft, right? It has this squishy, vulnerable abdomen with no shell of its own to protect it.
Right, it's totally exposed.
Left alone in the open ocean, it would be devoured instantly. It is entirely vulnerable. So what does it do? It frantically scrambles around the ocean floor and searches for an empty snail shell or a discarded piece of plastic or a glass jar.
Whatever it can find.
Right. It finds this external object, shoves its soft body inside, and it wears this borrowed thing as its identity and its armor. It literally cannot survive without it.
That's a great image.
And according to my reading of the AP framework, the human ego operates exactly like that crab. It has no actual solid substance of its own. It's just a structural error, a soft, terrified center.
Yes.
So it scrambles out into the world to pick up what the text calls scaffolding or borrowed identity. It picks up a nationality, a rigid political ideology, a prestigious career title.
It'll pick up anything.
It might even pick up a traumatic wound and wear that as a shell. Like, I am the victim of this terrible event. It wears the trauma as armor.
That maps perfectly onto the text concept of appropriation. The ego generates absolutely nothing of its own. It borrows everything.
Everything.
Everything. Opinions, social approvals, romantic relationships, bank accounts, grudges, degrees. All of these are appropriated from the external world and violently installed as me.
Violently installed.
The ego points to a college degree and says, that piece of paper is me. It points to a child and says, that separate human being is me.
So if I apply that to our daily behavior, is that why we get so violently defensive when someone insults our beliefs?
Absolutely.
Like if I'm arguing with someone on the internet about an economic policy and they prove me wrong, I don't just feel like I made a math error. My heart rate spikes, my face gets hot, I feel like I'm being physically attacked.
It's because to the ego, you are.
If my entire identity is just this borrowed scaffolding, is my reaction so extreme because I feel like my shell is being ripped off?
That is the exact mechanism. The ego defends its appropriated scaffolding as if its literal biological life depends on it. Wow. Why? Because without that scaffolding, the ego has no substance. It faces the void. It lives in perpetual subconscious fear of its own collapse.
So when someone attacks your politics,
or criticizes your favorite movie, or insults your sports team, if you have appropriated that external thing as your hermit crab shell, you do not experience it as an intellectual debate.
is an existential threat.
Exactly. The ego feels like it is being annihilated. The intensity of your rage is directly proportional to how heavily you have identified with that specific piece of scaffolding.
Okay, so if the ego is this borrowed shell, and it's the root of our suffering because it's constantly terrified of losing its scaffolding.
Constantly searching for a bigger, better shell.
Right. Then why don't our normal, culturally approved solutions work? We all know people, and let's be honest, we are these people who spend decades in cognitive behavioral therapy, or reading towering stacks of self-help books.
Or going on silent spiritual retreats in Bali.
Exactly. We do the work.
Huh.
Yet the hum of restlessness stays. Why do these massive efforts fail to fix the fundamental error?
To answer that, we have to look at how the AP framework introduces a really brilliant spatial metaphor for human movement. It exposes what it calls the biggest, most pervasive lie human beings have ever told themselves.
This is where we get to the mathematical formula. When I first saw an equation in a philosophical text, I had to read it 3 times.
It's unexpected, but it's precise.
The equation is y equals f of x and z. Let's break that down because it perfectly visualizes the trap we are in. Imagine a massive flat piece of paper laid out on a table. That is the horizontal plane. It has an x-axis going left to right and a z-axis going forward and backward. This flat plane represents change, time passing, accumulation, physical movement, action in the world.
Everything we do day to day.
Exactly. Now imagine a line going straight up off that paper, perpendicular, pointing toward the ceiling. That is the y-axis, the vertical axis.
And what does that represent?
That vertical line represents genuine freedom, actual liberation, or what the text calls ego thinning.
The spatial mapping is so crucial here. So the great lie we tell ourselves, the y equals f of x z equation, is the false belief that if we run around fast enough and far enough on the flat piece of paper, the x and z axis, we will somehow mathematically generate lift and rise up the y-axis.
Right. We think that horizontal effort equals vertical elevation.
We really do.
We believe that if I just change my location, change my partner, change my job, change my diet, I will achieve a higher state of being.
We believe that a variation in horizontal movement will naturally produce vertical displacement. But the framework is absolute and uncompromising on this. No amount of horizontal movement can ever produce vertical height.
Never.
Never. They are fundamentally different dimensions. You can run 10,000 miles on the flat paper. Your vertical height remains exactly 0.
This brings us perfectly back to the hook we started the show with.
Ugh.
The text contrasts a highly ambitious, materialistic shopkeeper with a highly devoted ascetic monk.
Let's really look at these two guys.
Yeah, take the shopkeeper. He opens one small store. It's not enough. He desires 10 stores. He works day and night, stressing over supply chains, fighting with competitors, accumulating capital, ignoring his family, until he finally owns a massive empire of 50 stores.
He is running incredibly fast, sweating and bleeding on the horizontal plane.
Now look at the ascetic monk. He renounces money. He gives away his clothes. He goes up to a freezing cave. He fasts for 1 day. It's not enough. He desires to fast for 10 days. He accumulates spiritual merit. He aims to meditate for 50 hours straight without moving, fighting through the physical pain to achieve a vision.
Externally, society looks at these two figures and says they are total opposites. One is the embodiment of worldly attachment. The other is the embodiment of holy detachment.
We revere the monk and we critique the shopkeeper.
But structurally, the AP framework looks at them and says they are identical twins.
Identical.
Identical. Both are operating entirely, 100%, on the flat horizontal plane. Both are intensely driven by desire.
Just different flavors of it.
Exactly. One desires financial capital, the other desires spiritual capital, or moksha. The monk hasn't dismantled his ego, he has simply changed his list of objects.
He just swapped his shell.
He has swapped out worldly, material scaffolding for shiny, spiritual scaffolding. He is still the exact same clinger, the exact same anxious accumulator, desperately trying to hoard his way to freedom.
Changed his list of objects. That shifts the entire paradigm. It doesn't matter what you're chasing dollars or enlightenment points of you're chasing, the engine running inside you is exactly the same.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of how we function, the text uses a really brilliant mechanical metaphor. The internal combustion engine, or the IC engine.
How does that fit in?
Ego-driven action, any action on that horizontal plane requires desire as its combustible fuel. In order to move horizontally, the engine requires two components. It needs a backward linkage, which is a sense of lack or desire, like I am incomplete.
Okay.
And it needs a forward linkage, which is an anticipated fruit or reward. If I get this, I will be complete. I feel empty, so I do X in order to get Y to fill the emptiness.
That is the IC engine roaring, burning the fuel of desire.
Exactly.
I want to pause here and apply this IC engine concept to something I think almost every listener has experienced at some point. Think about moments of deep, crushing depression or severe professional burnout. You're lying in bed on a Sunday. You don't want to go to work on Monday. You don't want to see your friends. You don't even want to watch TV. You just want nothing.
Just totally depleted.
Sometimes when we hit that absolute bottom, we mistake that numb burnout for peace. We think, oh, I finally let go of the rat race. I've dropped my ambition. I am at peace.
It is a very common misdiagnosis, but the text argues forcefully that this state isn't peace at all. The IC engine hasn't been dismantled.
The structure of the ego hasn't been transcended.
Not at all. What has actually happened is that the engine just temporarily ran out of gas. The tank is completely empty, so the machine has stalled out. The fundamental intent and architecture of the ego hasn't changed one bit.
And the proof of this is immediate, right?
Oh, immediate. If you give that deeply burnt out, supposedly peaceful person a sudden, massive rush of external validation, say, an email offering them their dream job with a huge salary, what happens?
They jump right out of bed. The depression vanishes in 5 seconds.
Precisely. You put high-octane fuel back into the tank, and that exact same egoic engine roars back into its former viciousness, accelerating down the horizontal plane.
The machine just lacked fuel. It didn't undergo any structural transformation.
Exactly.
That is a terrifyingly accurate description of the boom and bust cycle of ambition and burnout. We just keep stalling out, resting, and then refilling a broken engine.
Over and over.
But wait, this brings up a massive question. If the ego is the engine doing all this exhausting horizontal running, where does the mind fit into this framework?
That's a great question.
Because culturally, we always blame our minds. We say, my mind won't shut off at night. My mind is making me anxious. I need to practice mindfulness to fix my mind.
Yeah.
But the AP framework completely exonerates the mind.
It does, and it's a crucial philosophical distinction that shifts the entire burden of responsibility. In this framework, the mind is viewed as nothing more than a biological machine, an innocent, neutral processor.
Just a processor.
It consists essentially of two functional components. Memory, which is just an objective inventory of past objects and sensory experiences, and intellect, which is the computational capacity to process relationships, logic, and patterns between those objects.
Okay.
In its natural baseline biological state, the mind is entirely innocent. It doesn't desire, it doesn't fear, it doesn't hate, and it certainly doesn't plan elaborate revenge scenarios.
Okay, if the mind is just a neutral biological computer, then why am I lying awake at 3 a.m., agonizing over a minor typo in an email I sent to my boss, playing out apocalyptic scenarios of getting fired? What is doing that, if not my mind?
The ego has commandeered the mind. It has hijacked the biological machinery.
Hijacked it.
Think of the ego as a drunk, terrified driver who has broken into a perfectly functioning, neutral vehicle. The vehicle isn't the problem.
The car is fine.
Right. But once the ego takes the wheel, it takes the innocent faculty of memory and weaponizes it. Memory ceases to be an objective database and turns into a heavily edited, cherry-picked narrative designed solely to justify the ego's existence.
Oh, I do this all the time.
We all do. The ego actively suppresses memories that threaten its self-image and grossly exaggerates memories that validate its victimhood or its greatness. And then the ego takes the innocent faculty of intellect and turns it into a ruthless defense attorney.
A defense attorney. That makes so much sense. We use our intelligence not to find the truth, but to build elaborate, airtight rationalizations for why our toxic behavior was actually entirely justified.
Consider a very mundane example. You get into a petty, irrational argument with your partner over loading the dishwasher.
The classic fight.
Right. Deep down you snapped because you were just tired and irritable. But you storm into the other room, and what does your intellect do?
It goes to work.
Commandeered by the ego, your intellect instantly goes to work building a legal case. It pulls up a file of things your partner did 3 years ago. It analyzes the tone of their voice.
They said it with that specific sigh.
Exactly. Within 5 minutes, your highly capable intellect has generated an incredibly compelling, logically sound argument for why you are the ultimate victim of their systemic disrespect.
Wow.
The intellect, acting as the defense attorney, will tirelessly defend whatever the ego has already secretly decided it wants to do. This is exactly why raw high intelligence does not automatically produce spiritual freedom or happiness.
Because it just makes a better attorney.
Yes. High intelligence placed entirely in the service of the rigid ego just produces much more sophisticated, inescapable imprisonment. You just become better at arguing your way into misery.
So, trying to treat the mind for suffering, trying to quiet the thoughts, or do cognitive exercises without addressing the ego is like blaming the car when the driver's blindingly drunk.
Correct.
The engine is fine. The steering wheel is fine. It's the terrified drunk ego behind the wheel that is causing the crashes.
That is precisely the framework's diagnostic stance. Correct attribution of the disease is necessary for correct treatment. You have to address the driver, the ego, not just try to soothe the machinery of the mind.
But tracing the problem back to the ego instead of the mind brings up a massive, glaring logical wall. We run straight into what philosophers call the epistemological trap.
Yes, the big one.
Let me try to break this down. If my mind is currently hijacked by a drunk driver, my ego and my intellect is functioning purely as a corrupt defense attorney whose only job is to protect that ego.
Right.
Then how can I possibly trust my own thoughts, my own self-assessment to get me out of this mess? I am using a broken tool to try and fix the broken tool.
You have hit on the core paradox of the entire framework. It's the ultimate locked room mystery. It is what they call the observer problem.
The observer problem.
The ego is inherently structurally unreliable as a judge of its own vertical movement because it is operating simultaneously as the contestant in the game and the referee scoring the game.
It's the ultimate fox guarding the henhouse scenario. If I sit down on my medication cushion and after a month I ask myself, am I becoming more enlightened? Is my ego getting thinner? My ego is the one generating the answer. And what is it going to say?
It will always inevitably answer, yes, absolutely. Look at how much we meditate now. Look at how beautifully detached and serene we are compared to those ordinary people.
It just gives itself a gold star.
It will always manufacture evidence of progress. Why? Because finding evidence of spiritual progress allows the ego to continue its current operations without actually being threatened or disturbed.
It just adds advanced spiritual seeker to its heavy shell of scaffolding.
The ego is perfectly happy to play the game of spirituality as long as it gets to remain the one playing it.
So if I fundamentally cannot trust my own self-assessment, aren't I just permanently stuck? I mean, isn't this entirely hopeless for the listener? If my ego is running the diagnostic test, the test is permanently rigged. I can never escape my own subjective loop.
It would be entirely hopeless, structurally speaking, if we were completely isolated systems. But this is exactly why the framework insists on the absolute non-negotiable necessity of an external reference point.
An external point? Like what?
A teacher, a specific text, a wisdom tradition. Not as a magical guru to blindly worship, but as a mirror.
A mirror. Let's explore that function.
The ego evaluating itself is a closed, corrupt loop. A mirror cannot examine its own surface without the presence of another reflective surface. An external teacher or a deeply penetrating text breaks the closed loop.
Okay, that makes sense.
But we must be very careful with this distinction. A mirror doesn't do the looking for you. A mirror doesn't grant you enlightenment or zap you with mystical energy.
It's just a reflective surface.
A mirror just stands there, objective and unyielding, and makes it infinitely harder for you to look away from your own ugliness, your own falseness, your own hypocrisies. It reflects the drunk driver back to you so clearly that the defense attorney can no longer make a convincing case.
And reading the framework, I appreciated how incredibly pragmatic and almost unsentimental it is about this relationship with a teacher. There's a lot of skepticism today about gurus and power dynamics, rightfully so. But this framework isn't about subservience to a master, is it?
Far from it. It is entirely functional. The framework states that you extend authority to a teacher or a text only as long as they demonstrably serve the dissolution of your ego. It is a strictly utilitarian dynamic.
So you have to keep checking it.
Yes. You must periodically reassess the mirror. You ask yourself, is this mirror still showing me my falseness, or have I learned how to hide from it? Have I just turned my relationship with the teacher into another piece of cozy scaffolding?
Oh, treating the teacher like a new shell.
Exactly. If the relationship is no longer serving your active dissolution, you walk away. The ultimate goal, structurally speaking, is for the teacher and the student's voids to become one. The relationship exists solely and entirely to render the teacher completely unnecessary.
To render the teacher unnecessary. The ultimate sign of a successful teacher is their own obsolescence.
Precisely.
Okay, so we have the mirror. We are looking at ourselves. We see the borrowed scaffolding of the hermit crab shell. We see the icy engine burning the fuel of desire, running in endless circles on the horizontal plane.
We see the corrupt defense attorney.
We see all of it. What is the actual mechanism for stopping the engine? How do we begin moving vertically up that y-axis? What is the formula for true systemic change?
The framework provides a very precise, uncompromising formula for vertical movement. Change equals seeing plus intent. Both variables are absolutely necessary. Neither is sufficient on its own.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because this formula, seeing plus intent, is where the AP framework aggressively parts ways with some major, highly revered modern philosophies, specifically the teachings of J. Krishnamurti.
Yes, this is a vital philosophical divergence, and it addresses a pitfall many modern seekers fall into. Krishnamurti famously taught that choiceless awareness is enough.
To seeing it.
He posited that the pure, clear seeing of a false is false spontaneously dissolves it. He believed that if you truly deeply observe that you are operating out of fear without judging it, that cognitive clarity itself produces the transformation. The seeing is the doing.
But the AP framework looks at that and says, nope, not enough. Seeing alone fails. Why does it fail?
Because the AP framework argues that seeing, devoid of a secondary force called intent, leaves the ego structurally intact and unharmed. Let's look at a modern phenomenon to illustrate this.
Okay.
You can be incredibly self-aware. You can go to psychoanalysis twice a week for 10 years. You can acquire a massive, sophisticated vocabulary to describe your exact traumas.
You learn all the right words.
You can clearly see and articulate exactly why you sabotage your romantic relationships. But what happens? Your ego simply takes all that clinical seeing and gracefully incorporates it into its self-narrative.
Oh, man.
The ego says, I am a beautifully complex person who struggles valiantly with an anxious attachment style due to childhood wounds.
Oh, their therapy speak. The ego just uses the self-awareness to build a nicer, more socially acceptable hermit crab shell. It uses the language of healing to fatten itself up and avoid actually changing its behavior.
Exactly. The cognitive event of seeing happens, the vocabulary is acquired, but no actual thinning of the ego occurs. The engine is still running, it just has a better paint job. Therefore, seeing must be combined with intent.
So what is intent? What's fascinating here is how carefully the text defines intent, making sure to separate it entirely from the concept of willpower. Because when I hear intent, I just think of white-knuckling my way through a problem.
This raises a crucial operational question. What is the mechanical difference between willpower and intent? In this framework, willpower is the ego fighting an externalized enemy. Willpower is horizontal conflict.
So like dieting.
You decide you want to lose weight, so you use willpower to fight the pizza on the counter. You decide you want to be a more peaceful person, so you use willpower to suppress your anger when someone cuts you off in traffic. But in willpower, the ego itself remains fully intact. It is playing the role of the righteous warrior fighting a bad habit. It's the ego trying to override a symptom while preserving its own core structure. Willpower exhausts you because it is a civil war within the horizontal plane.
So if willpower is fighting the pizza, what is intent?
Intent is the ego actively, continuously choosing to move against its own fundamental self-preserving grain.
Fighting itself.
The framework posits that the ego has two constitutional opposing drives. The primary default drive is self-preservation, the desperation to survive, to accumulate scaffolding, to be right.
And the second one?
Deep down, there is a secondary drive, the drive for self-dissolution. At some profound level, the ego is exhausted by its own falseness. It actually desires its own freedom from itself. Intent is the activation of that second drive.
Oh, wow.
It is the ego fighting itself. It is the conscious choice to favor dissolution over preservation. When the defense attorney starts building a case for why you are the victim, intent is the mechanism that says, I see what you are doing and I refuse to take the stand.
But wait, if intent has to come from the ego, fighting its own survival instinct, where does the intent come from in the first place? If I am currently entirely trapped in my ego, what triggers this secondary drive?
This brings us to what the framework calls the bootstrapping resolution, and it is simultaneously the most demanding and the most deeply liberating claim the text makes.
Lay it on me.
The resolution is this. Everything else can come from the outside. The mirror can be provided. The teacher, the book, the harsh life circumstances that shatter your illusions, the intellectual clarity of seeing all of that can be handed to you by the world. But intent must come from you. You are sovereign.
You are sovereign. The buck stops entirely with you.
You are not waiting for a cosmic trigger. You are not waiting for a sudden descent of divine grace, or a clearing of your karma, or the perfect astrological alignment, or for your drug account to hit a certain number so you can finally relax.
No external agency.
No external agency, no God, no guru can choose self-dissolution for you. The ego must be repeatedly, ruthlessly reminded, you are not waiting for the right external conditions to begin moving vertically, you are waiting for yourself.
Man, that is a heavy responsibility. It strips away every single excuse we use to delay our lives, doesn't it? I'm not ready yet, I haven't found the right meditation method, my kids are too young, I need to resolve this trauma first. The framework says, no. You have the sovereignty right now in this exact messy moment.
Always. The text even addresses extreme cases, acknowledging what it calls a genuine neurological freeze, where the brain has been literally rewired by severe clinical trauma and a person truly cannot self-direct their way out of a panic state.
What happens then?
Even then, the framework argues that the individual retains the absolute minimum baseline of sovereignty, the choice to reach toward help, the choice to seek a surgeon. The sovereignty to choose the intent to heal is never mathematically zero.
So let's take all this theory and ground it in the reality of living. What does a human life actually look and feel like when a person exercises this intent? When they combine honest seeing with the intent to dissolve, and they actually start moving vertically up that y-axis?
It changes everything.
Do they turn into an emotionless, detached robot? Because I think a massive fear for a lot of listeners is that losing the ego means losing our passion, our love, our humanity. We fear becoming cold and indifferent.
It is a very common fear, but the reality of vertical movement is the exact opposite of cold detachment. To explain this, we have to look at how the framework completely redefines human action and human emotion. Let's start with action. We talked earlier about the grammar of the ego, whyness.
Right. I do this because of that. The backward link of lack, the forward link of anticipated reward, the IC engine.
Yes.
I go to the alpha networking event because I want the promotion so that I can feel important. Whyness.
When an ego begins to genuinely thin, action transitions away from whyness and enters a state of I amness. This is the framework's rigorous, mechanistic articulation of the ancient Bhagavad Gita concept of nishkama karma, which loosely translates to action without desire for the fruit.
I've always struggled with that concept. How does someone act without desire? Why would they get out of bed? Why would they build a house or paint a painting if they don't desire a result?
Because the action is no longer viewed as a means to an end. It is a sheer, spontaneous expression of the center. When you ask an ego-thin person why they're doing something, why they're serving the poor, or writing a symphony, or simply sweeping the floor, the only truly honest answer they can give is, because I am.
Wow, just being.
The action arises from a state of presence and fullness, not from a state of lack. And here's the magic of it. Because the action doesn't depend on a future result to justify it, every single moment of such a life stands totally completed in itself.
It's already complete.
A person operating from I amness cannot be disappointed because they wanted nothing from the future. They cannot be cheated by others because they kept no accounts.
Kept no accounts. I want to linger on that because the text uses a very specific financial metaphor here. The ledger.
It's a powerful metaphor.
The ego functions like a bitter accountant, constantly keeping a ledger of what it is owed. Every gift we give, we secretly record as a debt the other person owes us. Every hurt we sustain, we record as a grievance that must be repaid. We maintain our suffering because it's a claim strategy.
We hold on to it.
Let's say a friend betrayed you 10 years ago. You haven't spoken since. The framework suggests we keep that anger burning because we are holding the ledger open. You hurt me 10 years ago, and I am keeping this pain alive as undeniable proof that the universe owes me a debt.
That is precisely the sickness of the ledger. The ego weeps and complains, not primarily because it was hurt in the past, but because it feels it was not paid adequately in the present for the hurt. It uses the trauma as currency.
It trades on it.
Ego-thin action, I am-ness, simply closes the ledger. It burns the account book. It forgives not out of moral superiority, but because carrying the ledger is too heavy and obstructs vertical movement.
That reframes so much of our daily human conflict. But what about the really deep emotions? What about profound human grief when someone we love dies? Does the framework tell us not to mourn?
No, it makes a stunning, deeply compassionate distinction between two types of mourning. Egoic grief and tenderness.
Okay, what's egoic grief?
Egoic grief is what happens when the ego scrambles to maintain itself through a devastating loss. The ego looks at the deceased and says, this person belonged to me, they enlarged my identity, they made me feel safe, and without them, my shell is broken and I stand reduced.
Oh, wow.
The tears are real, the pain is agonizing, but the actual object of the grief is the ego's own diminishment. It is secretly mourning the loss of an instrument of its own self-enlargement.
That is a very tough pill to swallow. To look at our deepest moments of mourning and see a core of selfishness. But if that is egoic grief, what is the alternative? How does an ego-thin person mourn?
Through tenderness, non-egoic grief. Tenderness looks at the immense loss of a beloved and says, what an extraordinary being this was, of immense value to creation itself. To the extent that I was intimate with them, I was dissolved by their love.
They were a mirror.
Yes. The way to honor them, the way to remain intimate with them, even now that they are physically gone, is to allow this loss to dissolve me further. Tenderness honors the deceased by allowing the heartbreak to further thin the ego's boundaries. It is an outward expression of love, an inward direction of dissolution, rather than an inward hoarding of pain to rebuild the shell.
The way to remain intimate even now is to be dissolved further. That is incredibly beautiful. It changes grief from a closing down into a breaking open. And what about the other side of the spectrum? What about happiness? Everyone listening to this just wants to be happy.
Yeah. The framework would argue that the pursuit of happiness is a horizontal trap. Happiness, as we typically experience it, is just a brief, temporary relief from discomfort.
A temporary relief.
It is the ego's desperate tightrope act. It is maintained only by frantically controlling external circumstances, making sure the money is right, the relationship is smooth, the health is good, and it is destroyed the absolute moment change inevitably happens.
And change always happens.
The text defines happiness quite brutally. It is merely the ego celebrating the fact that its funeral hasn't happened yet.
Oh, wow. Happiness is just the relief of surviving another day.
Exactly. What the vertical axis offers is not the fragile tightrope of happiness, but the solid ground of joy. Joy is radically redefined in this philosophy. It is not an emotion dependent on circumstances. Joy is the ego's direct experience of its own thinning.
So it's active.
It is the active, celebratory elation of the ego witnessing its own needlessness. It is, to borrow the metaphor, the ego's party at its own funeral. And what's absolutely crucial for the listener to understand is that true joy and physical or emotional pain can coexist simultaneously.
They can.
Yes, the body may be in real suffering from an illness, the mind may be processing a tragedy, but underneath what arises is a profound quality of aliveness and rightness that is unmistakably joyous. Joy doesn't require a smile.
So if the ego is thinning and we are operating without a ledger, experiencing this profound joy and acting out of I amness.
Yeah.
How does this manifest in the things we create? The text actually touches on aesthetics and art, which I found fascinating.
Yes, its definition of true creativity is brilliant, creating without a creator. The framework argues that all truly great art, the art that survives centuries and touches the universal human core, happens in the momentary absence of the artist's ego.
The creator disappears.
For a split second, the ego steps out of the room, the conceptual I vanishes, and something undeniably true passes through the biological instrument of the artist onto the canvas or the page.
But wait, if I think about the history of art, artists are notoriously egotistical. History is full of brilliant painters, musicians, and writers who were absolute raging narcissists in their personal lives. How does that square with this theory?
The framework is totally at peace with that contradiction. It acknowledges that sustained creative work is an oscillation, a swinging pendulum. There are fleeting moments of genuine ego absence where the magic happens, where the muse speaks.
Okay, that makes sense.
But that is inevitably followed by the ego rushing back into the room to claim credit. When the ego returns, the artist continues to paint or write, but now they are producing what the text calls filler. The mark of a master artist isn't that they live in a state of permanent, holy egolessness. It's that they have the brutal, unflinching honesty during the editing process to recognize which parts were created in the ego's absence and which parts are just egoic filler attempting to look clever. And the master edits out the filler.
That makes perfect sense. The art that makes us weep, the song that feels like it was written specifically about our own lives, is the art where the I got out of the way. Which brings us, inevitably, to the final destination of all this philosophy.
The climax.
We've talked about the illusion of the horizontal plane, the formula for moving at the vertical y-axis, the thinning of the ego, the closing of the ledger, the joy of dissolution. So what happens when you finally reach the very top of the y-axis?
Right.
What happens when you achieve full, permanent, flawless enlightenment?
This brings us to what is perhaps the most radical, paradigm-shattering climax of the entire AP framework. The answer to what happens when you reach the top is nothing.
Nothing.
Because final, permanent enlightenment while the physical body lives is a structural impossibility.
I want the listener to really, truly hear that. We are reading a dense, deeply spiritual philosophy text, and it is explicitly stating that the ultimate goal of all spirituality, permanent enlightenment, is mathematically impossible. Why?
You have to remember where we started this entire conversation. The ego is not just a bad attitude, it has physiological origins, the skin boundary.
Right, the biology.
The physical separateness of the biological organism. That physical boundary is what the framework calls the ego floor. It is the irreducible, absolute minimum of ego that must persist as long as the body breathes, eats, and navigates physical space. Even the most profoundly realized, serene, vertically advanced teacher in human history retains this physical floor. As long as you have a body, you have an ego.
So anyone sitting on a stage claiming to be fully, perfectly enlightened
is making a structurally self-refuting statement. Think about the grammar of the claim. The declaration, I am fully enlightened, is made by an I. The I claiming the enlightenment is the ego.
Oh, that's wild.
It is, as the text brilliantly points out, the comical irony of the ego awarding extinction to itself. The ego survives by pretending it has been destroyed.
Issuing its own death certificate, but sticking around to frame it on the wall. But wait, let me push back here on behalf of the listener, because there is a very massive, common counter-argument to this idea that the ego is all there is.
Let's hear it.
A lot of modern psychology, specifically Carl Jung, and tons of modern self-help and New Age spiritual traditions tell us that, sure, the ego is the messy surface, But underneath the ego, at the core of our being, there is a true authentic self.
Right, the inner light.
Exactly, an inner light, a hidden wholeness or soul waiting to be uncovered and polished.
The AP framework rejects that concept entirely and unequivocally.
Entirely. There is no true self hiding in there.
None.
Yeah.
There's no inner light to be discovered. There's no hidden depth behind the surface. The ego is the surface, and there is absolutely nothing behind it.
Nothing at all.
When the ego dissolves through intent, what remains is not a truer, shinier, more integrated version of the self. What remains is simply absence, the vast, silent void. The Jungian project of individuation, the process of integrating your dark shadow to become a whole, maximized self, is viewed by this framework as just the most sophisticated, culturally acceptable form of ego fattening available in the West.
Ego fattening.
It's the ego growing larger, claiming its mythological archetypes, and calling that massive growth enlightenment.
Okay, I could see how the Jungian model might be a trap. But what about the classical Eastern traditions, like Advaita Vedanta or the modern Neo-Davida teachers? They talk constantly about the witness.
The Sakshi. Yeah.
Right. They say that you are not your thoughts. You are the pure, detached awareness that safely watches the ego dissolve from a distance.
Rejected completely. And the reasoning is structurally flawless. The framework states that consciousness itself, by its very nature, is a dualistic structure. It requires a subject and an object.
We talked about this earlier, the knower and the known.
Exactly. When the ego, the subject, dissolves, consciousness as the ego knew it ceases to exist. There is no residual, pure awareness hanging out in the background, eating popcorn, watching the movie of your life. The idea of the witness is diagnosed by this text as the ego's absolute, final, most refined, most desperate survival strategy.
Explain how the witness is a survival strategy.
Imagine the ego realizes it is being cornered. The mirror has exposed it. The intent is dissolving it. To survive complete annihilation, the ego retreats one step back and claims the seat of the eternal observer.
I see.
It says, okay, fine, the messy personality is dissolving, my desires are dissolving, but I am the pure, untouched witness watching it all happen. The witness is not what actually remains when the ego goes. The witness is simply the ego's last impenetrable refuge. It is the hermit crab finding an invisible shell.
That is relentless.
Yeah.
This philosophy strips away every single hiding place. No true self to discover, no witness to retreat into, no final enlightenment trophy to put on my mantle, just absence.
Just absence.
So I have to ask the ultimate question on behalf of the listener. Why do it? If there is no finish line, if there is no ultimate payoff, and it just leads to absence, isn't that just bleak nihilism? Why should I undertake this brutal, exhausting war against my own self-preservation if I never actually get to arrive?
Because of how the framework defines the ultimate human experience. Love. Love in this context is not a sentimental feeling or a biological attachment. Love is a direction of movement.
A direction.
It is the continuous, ongoing inner strife of an ego that recognizes its own falseness and consciously chooses self-dissolution again and again, moment by moment. Love structurally requires duality. It requires a lover and a beloved, a subject moving toward an object.
Okay,
The text states a profound paradox. If complete, permanent enlightenment were actually possible, it would kill love instantly. Because in total non-duality, the lover would cease to exist. There would be no one left to love.
The journey is the point. The continuous act of dissolving is the highest state.
The ongoing, loving journey of self-dissolution without counting the miles, without estimating if the destination is reachable, without keeping a ledger of spiritual progress, is not a bleak compromise. It is the fullest, most intensely alive existence available to an embodied human being. It is the only way to live without the hum of restlessness.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, sitting in your car or walking your dog right now? Let's synthesize this massive deep dive. The AP framework diagnoses the restlessness you feel after every major achievement, not as a failure of your ambition and not as a psychological defect.
It is the fundamental structural error of the ego.
The felt sense of I am X. We spend our entire lives running exhausting marathons on the horizontal plane, burning the combustible fuel of our desires in our icy engines, desperately hoping to gain vertical freedom. But Y equals F of X. Z is a mathematical lie. More horizontal running will never equal vertical lift.
And we cannot cure this condition by using willpower to fight our symptoms or by retreating to a cave to try and permanently annihilate the ego, because the ego is anchored to the very physical skin of the body.
Right. We must instead use the mirror of honest seeing whether that's a relentless teacher, a profound text, or brutal self-reflection combined with the sovereign internal intent to dissolve our own false borrowed scaffolding.
Exactly.
So I challenge you to look closely at your own life today. Where are you currently keeping a ledger of past hurts just to maintain your identity as the wronged one? Where are you confusing the numb exhaustion of burnout, a temporary empty gas tank, for actual profound peace? What pieces of borrowed scaffolding, your politics, your job title, your trauma, are you defending in arguments as if your literal physical life depends on it?
And as you investigate those questions, I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative concept from the text to mull over on your own time. It's a concept called the first superstition.
The first superstition. Tell us about it.
We live in a highly modern, incredibly cynical world full of self-declared rationalists, people who proudly deconstruct religion, who dismantle cultural traditions, who debunk fake news, and who demand rigorous empirical evidence for every single claim made in the public square.
Sure, the science-minded folks.
They believe they have completely freed themselves from the darkness of superstition. But the framework argues that these rationalists are actually victims of the deepest, most foundational superstition of all, because they subject absolutely everything in the universe to intense scrutiny, except the I that is doing the scrutinizing.
Oh, wow.
The examiner remains entirely unexamined. The ego is assumed to be real, permanent, and valid simply because it is the thing doing the investigating. The text warns, if you dismantle every single belief in the world, but you leave the I entirely intact, you have merely stripped away secondary superstitions only to bow down to the primary one.
Wow. You question absolutely everything in the universe except the lens you are looking through. That is a thought to chew on for days. Liberation, as we've learned today, isn't a grand, permanent arrival with fireworks and a certificate of enlightenment. It is a fraction of a millimeter of vertical height gained by catching yourself in a lie today, by catching your defense attorney manufacturing a case, by catching your ego claiming authorship of a beautiful moment, or keeping a ledger, or desperately seeking a new hermit crab shell.
Just simple, humble, continuous honesty.
You catch it today and you do it again tomorrow, for as long as the body breathes. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. I hope the next time you find yourself sitting on the couch after a big win and you hear that familiar hum of restlessness creeping back in, you don't judge yourself. You just smile, recognize the internal combustion engine asking for more fuel, and choose in that moment to just be. Keep questioning your scaffolding.